Hitler's last hope, the Battle of the Bulge. After Operation Cobra, the Allies were quickly advancing across France, while the German remnants were retreating to the West Wall in a disorderly manner. The West Wall is also known as the Siegfried Line, and the Siegfried Line is a fortification line coming from half of the Netherlands to Belgium to Luxembourg to France. Now the Allies wanted to look if they maybe could have a way to pass around the Siegfried Line. So of course you don't want to smash headfirst into a fortified enemy position. And there was, and like I said earlier, it only was halfway to the Netherlands, the fortification line. So the idea was to go through the Netherlands and then cross into Germany, and this would eventually be Operation Market Garden. It would also be the biggest airborne operation ever. However, this operation failed and they had to settle with something else. Hitler wanted to make one fast and furious strike to hopefully force the Allies back to the peace negotiations table in the hopes that they would then be able to transfer all their troops on the west to the east. Now the idea to do this was that they would get Antwerp. The port of Antwerp was very important to the Allies, and this is because a bunch of supplies came through the port of Antwerp since the liberation of the Scheldt in the Netherlands. Now furthermore, a couple of other things which would be important was that the Germans would then trap the 21st Army of Montgomery in the Netherlands and cut them off from the 12th US Army Group, and furthermore it would also defend the Ruhr, which was the industrial heartland of the Germany. Without it, they would be able to make much less weapons to continue their war effort. Of course, to do this, Hitler needed a sufficient amount of manpower and equipment. So he asked Walter Böhle and Albert Speer to organize enough manpower and to organize enough equipment for this November offensive. Now, as the name suggests, they wanted to do this offensive in November, but this eventually was changed to late November in order to have 25 more divisions in operational reserve use. For this massive offensive, Germany was basically scraping the barrel. For one, they pulled troops from the Balkans and from Finland to the Western Front. Furthermore, they expanded the conscription age limit and also dropped the health requirements. And last but not least, they pulled troops from the Air Force and Navy. So 100,000 of new men were officially conscripted into the German army to fight in the Battle of the Bulge. These men were placed in the so-called Volksgrenadier divisions. Now to me this is an odd choice, and the reason why I say this is an odd choice is because instead of strengthening already existing divisions, they decided to create entirely new divisions. So the already existing divisions were undermanned, undersupplied and more. So even if on paper the German army looks to be very formidable, it might be that numbers have lied to you. Now the man who was supposed to make all of Hitler's dreams come to fruition was Alfred Jodl. This man was planning all of Hitler's offensives, and the Battle of the Bulge was no different. Now the first deadline for the Battle of the Bulge was set at the 20th of December, and then they would attack 5 days later, but this was eventually, due to a lot of complications, delayed to the 16th of December. Now a couple of these complications were reinforcing already existing units, even if it didn't happen on mass scale. The training of new units, so of course the new Volksgrenadier divisions needed some more training, and of course trying to find the necessary fuel to make this offensive work. However, both field marshals which were supposed to command these armies agreed that Hitler's plans were way too ambitious. Now, these two field marshals were, of course, Walter Model and Gerd von Rundstedt. Now, they both agreed that for an offensive of this size, there was too little time to actually prepare for it, and that they should take it a bit easier. Now, both field marshals, of course, tried to submit their own plans, and these two plans were completely different from each other. Now, Gerd von Rundstedt's plan was a 25-mile wide front, a shorter distance to the Meuse, and they would ignore the forest. Walter Model's plan was a 40-mile wide front, and this would actually cover the northern part of Hitler's offensive. But these two ideas were just promptly ignored. Throughout the entire operation, both Mödel and Rundstedt tried to convince Jodl and Hitler that this would be a suicidal operation and that they would want them to rethink this operation. They tried on the 26th, but this was promptly ignored, and Mödel tried again on the 2nd, and he even took Joseph Dietrich from the 6th Panzer Army with him and Hassel von Manteuffel from the Panzer Army, but these complaints were refused and promptly ignored once more. 4 days later, both Rundstedt and Mödel would submit their final drafts of their plans, but these were promptly ignored once more. And 3 days later, the final version of Wacht am Rhein, so the operation name, would be approved. But this was basically the same plan as already made a month prior. One very interesting warning Walter Mödel gave in November was when he said, if the attack is stopped at the Meuse due to a lack of reserves, it will only result in a bulge of the line, and it will not result in the destruction of sizable enemy forces. The widely stretched flanks, especially in the south, will only invite enemy counterattacks. And this statement would be very accurate. Now we have already seen what the attack of Walter Mödel would look like and what the attack of Gerd von Rundstedt would look like. But what would be Hitler's attack plan? Now Hitler's attack plan would be a 65-mile wide front into Belgium, where the 6th Panzer Army would be on the north, the 5th Panzer Army would be in the center, and the 7th Panzer Army would be on the left flank, while the 15th Army would extend the attack northward. The idea was for it to be done by 10 Army Corps with 10 mechanized and 18 infantry divisions, which would lead the assault, and they would be supported by 8 artillery corps with 8 Werfer brigades. The first wave would have 4 panzer divisions, and 6 panzer divisions would join in the second wave, and 3 more would join later in. If all of them would be on full strength, they would have around 700,000 to 1.1 million troops, but this was just a plan. In actuality, they had 29 infantry divisions with 12 mechanized divisions. High estimates would be that this would be around 500,000 troops which would partake in the offensive. Jodl really wanted to please Hitler, and in order to do that he wanted to make it seem like this operation was about to succeed and everything was about to go as planned and amazing and fantastic and whatnot. And in order to do that he was lying about the strength of their divisions. So in all actuality, instead of being on full strength, most divisions would have shortages in manpower, equipment or fuel, or worst of all, not even exist at all. Even though the field marshals on the ground generally gave the right estimates of how strong their units actually were. Now, as you may have noticed thus far, this plan was relying on a lot of faith, hope, good luck and chance. Now, if both of your field marshals are saying, man, this isn't a good idea, maybe you should look critically at your own plan and try to make some adjustments to it. Now, yeah, it was just basically a foolish bet, and it looked like a last desperate attempt to inflict some damage upon your enemies, and not an attempt to make the Allies surrender or go to the peace negotiations table. Now, to make sure that Germany would actually win this operation, the Germans tried to do anything in their power to make sure that this would succeed. And one of these things that they would do was they would give a man named Otto Skorzeny the task of creating a unit which would be disguised as Americans, so they made actual tanks which also resembled American tanks and American suits and whatnot in order to cause friendly fire incidents. Now, if you want to watch the full video on that, you can do so in the top right here, and I'll see you guys in that video. Now let's continue. We've already talked a bit about Hitler's plans, but let's try to do it in a bit more detail. Now, the 6th Panzer Army was supposed to go through Malmedy and cross the Meuse at Liege. The 5th Panzer Army would aim for Antwerp, and the 7th Panzer Army would aim for the south of Bastogne and Neufchâteau, and if possible try to take back Luxembourg City. But most of it would be more difficult than expected. While the Germans were of course planning for the Battle of the Bulge, the Allies weren't sitting still either. Now, Bernard Montgomery was planning to cross the Rhine River, and the 9th US Army was to help with that. Meanwhile, the 3rd US Army was planning an assault on Frankfurt, and the 7th US Army was thinking about turning north. But because they were planning an offensive, they needed a lot of manpower at one position, and another position, and another position, because they were planning 3 offensives, of course, like I already said. But that will mean that one sector, or maybe more sectors, is going to be severely undermanned. And one of these sectors was 85 miles long, and it had been guarded by 70,000 men. Which, of course, isn't really that much, especially not for World War II standards. Now, by the 12th of December, the Allies thought, okay, Germany can't be this strong anymore. They can't mount a massive offensive into Belgium, so we should be good with the 70,000 men we have currently guarding that sector. But boy, were they wrong. We've already seen the Allies make that mistake once before, and this mistake was of course made at Operation Market Garden, where they thought that they could just breeze in the Netherlands and take all the 3 bridges, and that the Germans wouldn't be that strong anymore, but they were wrong. Now, of course, underestimating your enemy in a war can be fatal to your entire war campaign, so let it be a lesson to a lot of people: don't underestimate your enemy. Even if they look weak, they might be incredibly strong, and that is a page you can take out of Sun Tzu's book Art of War. When you are strong, appear weak. When you are weak, appear strong. And that is a way to mind trick your enemies. Now, like I already said, they thought that the Germans were weak. They thought that they didn't have the necessary equipment, manpower and fuel in order to mount a large invasion. Now, the day before actually the Battle of the Bulge began, so that is the 15th of December 1944, they actually captured 4 German soldiers who vaguely told them about the offensive, but this was dismissed. Now, Germany had raised a decently sized army for this offensive, and Germany wanted to utilize every single advantage they could get their hands on. Now, one of these advantages could be a surprise attack. Now, of course, if you want to do a surprise attack, your enemy must not know that you're going to strike, where you're going to strike, or even if you're going to strike. Now, what Germany would do was they would fly over their Luftwaffe, their airplanes, to make as much noise as possible to cancel out the noise the ground forces were making when they were marching or driving towards their positions for the offensive. Now, this actually kind of worked, and also in order to conceal their movements, they also moved at night. When everything was in place on the 16th of December 1944, the operation commenced. Now, this operation saw a lot of fierce fighting, and it saw a lot of heroics, but it also saw a lot of war crimes. Now, one of these groups which caused a lot of war crimes was the group of Piper. Now, the group of Piper drove in the south of Malmedy, where it encountered a United States convoy, and eventually, after a firefight, 100 men of this convoy surrendered, and eventually 2 hours later, 2 hours after they were captured, 84 of them were executed, which is now known as the Malmedy Massacre. Now, of course, this isn't the only instance of Piper going crazy in Belgium. They in total killed 250 prisoners of war. That's crazy. Where a new unit replaced another unit on the front lines on the 12th of December 1944. Now, this new unit was the 106th, and they just arrived in Europe, and they just arrived at the front lines for the first time on the 12th of December 1944, replacing the 2nd Infantry Division. Now, this was only 4 days before Germany started, of course, the Battle of the Bulge, and it might have went as well as you might expect. Now, the 106 had 3 regiments, 3 main regiments, and those were the 422nd and the 423rd. Those 2 were on the front lines, and by the morning of the 17th, they were already completely cut off from supplies. They tried to desperately counterattack, but that didn't work, and eventually on the 19th, it was one of the biggest mass surrenders in US history. Now, one other regiment, so the 424th, yes, the 424th, my bad, sorry, was able to escape over the Our River and join the forces at Saint-Fie. The Germans definitely had some early success in the Battle of the Bulge, especially in the south, but while the Germans were gaining territories, the Allies weren't sitting still. Once information arrived about the Battle of the Bulge, the Allies started to rearrange reinforcements, and they started to get their strategies in order. Now, one of these strategies was that the 5th Corps would hold the north and the 8th Corps would hold the south. And once the attack would run out of steam, they would start to counterattack. However, making these strategies is one thing, but executing those strategies is a whole other thing. And this is because the front of the 8th Corps started to collapse. And this reminds me of the quote, "Bad news always travels slower than good news." And this made it also increasingly more difficult to make effective countermeasures. One of the countermeasures ideas was the plan of Lieutenant General Middleton. And this plan consisted of 3 points. Point 1 would be that the troops which were already on the front lines would have to do everything in their power to hold on. Point 2 would be that the reserves and engineers would set up roadblocks for stragglers to fall back on. And point 3 was to reinforce towns which would be key towns. And this is of course Saint-Fie, this is Bastogne, and this is Houffalize. And sure enough, a lone tank or anti-tank gun, carefully concealed, was able to slow down an entire Kampfgruppe. Furthermore, engineers would be blowing up bridges, which would be important for the German advance when they were approaching, forcing them to either find an entirely new route or wait until repairs were done. And this would give, in turn, the Allies crucial time to start reinforcing their front lines. Now, one of the battles which would reinforce the idea that this plan was working was the battle at Buchenbach. A lot of American positions were overrun, but due to heavy artillery fire in the support, they were able to drive back the Germans again and again. By the 21st, the Germans didn't have any mechanized vehicles to throw at the Americans, so instead of getting to the Meuse River, their attack fell apart in less than 8 kilometers. The 68th Corps from the Germans took over this sector, but eventually also failed to be successful. Now, the 5th Corps of the Americans was able to hold its own very well, but Army Group B from the Germans was creating a wedge in the lines of the 8th Corps of the Americans. So in response to this, on the 20th of December, General Eisenhower divided control of the battlefield between 2 army groups. This would make it easier to control, and this would mean that the US Army north of the break went to Montgomery. This would be a good choice because commanding such a wide front was becoming more and more impossible. In addition to all of that, it would allow Army Group commanders to focus on their own front. On the 23rd of December, the German advance began to slow down, and the reason why it began to slow down was because of multiple factors. Now, one of these factors was, of course, that the surprise attack after a week wasn't really a surprise anymore. Everyone knew that they were attacking, so it wasn't really a surprise. Furthermore, the skies turned clear again, and the Allies had air superiority. So this would force the Germans to, mainly in massive groups at least, to go in the night. Now let's take a closer look at the Battle of Bastogne. Bastogne was a very important city, and the reason why it was so important was because it had a lot of road junctions. So the Americans knew this, and the Germans knew this. Both knew the importance of Bastogne. So the Americans had their 101st sitting in Bastogne and a couple of other guys, and the Germans had the 26th Volksgrenadier and the 2nd Panzer Division. Now, by the 20th, the Bastogne city was completely surrounded, and the Germans really wanted to have Bastogne, so they started to attack Bastogne with the 26th and the 2nd, which I just mentioned. Now, the first attack fails, and the 2nd Panzer Division leaves, so it only leaves the 26th Volksgrenadier to besiege Bastogne. Now, on the 22nd of December 1944, the Allies who were in Bastogne receive the ultimatum from Germany. And of course, the Allies just reacted to it with a single word: nuts. They just said, yeah, we're not gonna surrender to you guys. Why would we? We are in a better position. You guys can surrender to us, but we're not gonna surrender to you. So basically, that's how it went. So the 26th Volksgrenadier tried to attack the city again and again, but every single time it just didn't work. They were able to hold on until the supplies arrived on the 23rd, and when the supplies arrived on the 23rd, it made their job a lot easier. Now, on the 27th, the encirclement or the siege was finally broken by Patton's army, and that was it for the Battle of Bastogne. By this time, the German front began to crumble, with them becoming more and more desperate. Now, one of these operations which showed how desperate they really were was an all-out attack from the Luftwaffe on Allied bases. They would go all in the air at the same time and try to destroy as many airplanes as possible, but even with the element of surprise, the Germans lost 300 airplanes and the Allies lost 260. But Germany couldn't replace the losses while the Allies could. Eventually, Germany was completely pushed back to the starting points of the Siegfried Line, and the Americans officially declared on the 25th of January for the Battle of the Bulge to be over. Having lasted 6 brutal weeks across snow and hills, this was Hitler's final hope of winning the war. And now it would only be a countdown until the Allies would reach Berlin. Sacrifices made by these brave men will not be forgotten, and neither will the atrocities committed. I want to thank every single one of you for watching this entire video. I really worked hard on it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I want to thank VW German Looker as well for being a member of my channel, and as well Sander. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, comment and sub. If I missed something, make sure to leave it in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.